Living alone in my apartment for the first time, I was walking out to my car to attend an evening church service. I hear this guy saying, "Hey, hello, can you help me?" I'm standing about 10 feet away, and when I stop to observe, it's this man in a wheelchair. He has one sack of groceries in his lap, and two on the ground beside him. He had on what looked like veteran attire and combat boots, but what stood out to me the most is I noticed how incredibly built and buff he was. Not just his arms, but his calves. The hairs on my arms and neck instantly stood up. I guess while silently observing him, he was waiting for me to walk up to him. I took a few steps back and shook my head no. His immediate response was, "I'm not going to do anything to you. Can't you see him in a wheelchair?" He then pointed to his door and said, "Look, I just need help putting the bags inside my door on the floor. That's all." I declined politely and began to walk away. The screaming, cursing, and insults were what made me basically run to my car. Safe in my car with the doors locked, I couldn't shake that awful feeling off of me. Fast forward to a couple of days later as I'm driving down the street headed home. Who do I see walking without a limp, cane, or with any visible disability? My heart simply dropped. I stayed in my apartment for a week and had a male friend walk me to my car when I got off of work, because I was too scared to be by myself in case of any more encounters. To this day, this strange encounter haunts me. I've experienced the same prowler on my property 7 times. I've called the police every time. I've seen him 3 times. He's tall, dressed in dark clothing, and wears a ski mask. His MO is to make his presence known by throwing rocks on the roof and looking in windows wearing a ski mask. Most incidences have occurred on the weekend between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., with the exception of a Thursday around 6 p.m. The first time I saw him was in my sliding glass door in the back of the house. He unscrewed an outdoor floodlight, didn't run away when spotted or yelled at through the windows. On one occasion, he returned after I called the police and they had left the property. I called the police again and they were able to track his footsteps around my home, including walking on an adobe wall. The police believe it's a neighbor that retreats to a hiding spot, probably around the open space and informal trail behind my house, or runs back to his home to hide and return later. The first incident occurred in December. However, I think he has been stalking my home since the end of November. The most recent incident was several weeks ago. Prowler returned. I heard thuds on the roof around 12 a.m. and called 911. This morning I found rocks on the roof, around 20 of them. This is the 8th incident I'm aware of. I dismissed loud thuds on the roof and unusual sounds coming from around the house early on. I've implemented security measures, including installing a surveillance system and acquiring firearms. The security cameras do not seem to scare him off. He has avoided them or allowed himself to be partially seen hiding behind bushes and trees. I'm concerned his behavior will escalate. I hope it doesn't come to a confrontation, but it's possible. I was in my late teens to early 20s when this happened. My boyfriend at the time had been flagged down by our neighbor at the top of our street because he would drive fast down the road sometimes. The man freaked out at him one day, and from then on the neighbor didn't like us. I agree with the lead foot, but he was rather rude about the whole interaction. From then on, we kept to ourselves and ignored this guy because of his aggressive and weird vibe. One night, 2 of our friends came over, and they asked if we wanted to walk over to the airfield/golf course area near our house, and we agreed. I was feeling ill all day with a horrible stomach ache, and after about an hour of hanging around, I asked if we could all as a group please go back to the house. They were hesitant because the night was young to them, but agreed. We get to the top of my street and I feel my stomach churning, and I tell our friends to meet us at the house while my boyfriend helped me. They walked ahead. At this point, we're in front of that neighbor's house across the street. I start violently puking in the bushes, trying to catch my breath. My boyfriend is aiding me and patting my back and rubbing in circles. I noticed he stopped. He freezes and very quietly says, "Let's go. Come on, right now." I instantly shudder because of his tone drop. I'm still throwing up at this point, so it's a bit difficult for me to think about walking. I think I said something like, "I can't, just wait for me." He quietly says through his teeth in a slight panic, "Now." At this point, I'm terrified. I start walking with him and he says, "Walk normally, stay at my pace. I'll tell you when we get to the house." Apparently, that neighbor was creeping around near us when I was sick on the road. It was after midnight at this point. He said that he saw him outside in the dark in his driveway and didn't think we noticed him. But my boyfriend said he saw this man crouch and walk around his cars in the driveway watching us. That's it, just watching. The crouching and hiding is what freaked me out. The man was already off and just weird. The whole thing weirds me out to this day. Like many young girls, I had aspirations of becoming a dancer when I was a teenager and loved nothing more than going to ballet class. This involved a bus journey from my home in Blaine to downtown Minneapolis, a 15-mile trip which was a good half-hour ride. On one particular evening, having finished class at the dance academy and enjoying a coffee with a friend, I spotted a strange-looking guy outside the bar staring right at me. It was such a warm evening, yet he dressed in a heavy blue and white hooded sweatshirt. He was tall and lean, with long hair spilling out from under the hood. His lips were so thin it appeared he had no mouth at all, but his eyes were huge and dark, and his stare made me very uneasy. My friend saw him too, but just laughed, rolled her eyes and said, "Kimmy, he's just some weirdo eyeing you up. Ignore him and he'll go away. Crazy hippie college student, I bet." The last bus home was just before dusk. I boarded and sat down near the back as I always did. A couple of minutes later, I was surprised to see the same odd-looking guy sitting in the aisle across from me. The bus was nearly empty, but I hadn't seen him embark. I was a shy teenager, yet felt compelled to turn and look at him. I caught his gaze, and not knowing what else to do, I gave a polite half-smile. He simply stared at me with those huge empty dark eyes, which made me feel so uncomfortable as they were totally devoid of emotion. He began to grunt some odd phrases. I couldn't understand everything, but one thing that stood out for sure was, "You afraid of the big bad wolf?" I shivered inside and prayed to get home fast. This guy was clearly nuts. For the next 20 minutes or so, I kept my head down and tried my best to ignore his mumblings. I was mighty thankful when he stood up to disembark about 10 minutes before my own stop. As he moved down the aisle to exit, I heard him repeat the phrase, "You afraid of the big bad wolf, little miss?" Then he looked back at me, laughed loudly and said, "Because you should be." Relieved but shaken, I got off some 4 miles further down the road. As the bus didn't stop directly on my street, I always took a shortcut through a small wooded area which led to a trailer park, across a field and then to my home. It was getting pretty dark by now, but I never worried. I knew a lot of my neighbors in the area, and it was always a relatively calm and peaceful zone. However, as I walked along the footpath, I heard a noise behind me, like a dead branch cracking underfoot. I turned my head and was absolutely horrified to see the same tall, lanky guy who got off the bus a few miles away. He was a fair distance from me, but I recognized immediately his blue and white hoodie, and in spite of the fading light, I could see his large hollow eyes. He was following me, but how the heck did he get there so fast? I had seen him disembark, yet here he was, close behind me on my own patch. My heart started to pound in my chest as he began to make some bizarre howling noises mimicking a wolf. What the heck did this person want with me? I began to imagine all sorts of scenarios. Was he a phantom? Did he have teleportation powers? A murderer? Oh, please let me make it to my front door, I thought in panic. I began to run, and as I did so, glanced back over my shoulder. The stranger had also started to quicken his pace. Adrenaline shot through my veins. Luckily for me, that woodland was quite boggy. As I turned around for a final time, I saw he had tripped, fallen in the mud, and was having some difficulty getting back on his feet. I simply carried on running and didn't look back. I had never been so thankful to reach home and remember the relief I felt as I shut the door firmly behind me. When I finally dared to look out the window, some half an hour later, I saw the same man. He was wandering up and down the street aimlessly, gazing into the windows of various homes. Eventually, he simply meandered off into the darkness. I slept uneasily with my eyes open that night and asked a couple of my neighbors the next morning if they had seen the stranger. They hadn't. Though many years have now passed, it remains a total mystery to me to this day. Who was that sinister guy? I have absolutely no idea how he could have gotten off the bus a few miles before me, yet still managed to follow me from my own stop. I will be forever thankful that he never caught up with me that evening, and luckily our paths never crossed again. Two weeks ago, I was home alone for the night. My husband had taken the girls to a cheer competition and had given me the weekend off. It was just me and our female German Shepherd, Igraine. I know that's a weird name, but it was the name of King Arthur's mother. My husband is a bit of a fantasy nerd. It was getting late and I'd just finished dinner when I decided to go take a bottle of wine upstairs and take a bath. Candles, bath bomb, a good book, the whole deal to have a night of relaxation. Must have been in there for a good half an hour when I heard Igraine downstairs start to bark. Not a bark like she wanted to go out, but snarling, growling, going crazy kind of bark. It scared the shit out of me, honestly. I had only heard her do that once before, and that was when a friend of the family she didn't know came up and talked to my daughters by the front fence. I immediately got out of the bath, threw on my robe, and went downstairs to see what was going on. Igraine was at the front door, the fur on her back raised. Other than that, I couldn't see anything wrong. I opened the door to see if anyone was outside, and no one was there. Some cars passed by, but that was it. I live in a good neighborhood, so thought nothing of it. Figured maybe someone or even another dog had walked by and she heard it, so she started barking. Closed the door and went back upstairs to finish my bath. I couldn't have been in there more than 15 minutes when I heard Igraine come tearing up the stairs and barking at my bedroom door. I got out of the tub again and wrapped a towel around me. My relaxation time seemed to be over, and I thought maybe Igraine was just lonely or bored. Just opened the bathroom door that connects to the master bedroom when one of the bedroom windows was smashed in. I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran to let Igraine into the room. She burst through the door and ran straight to the window. I grabbed my phone and called the police. Next, I heard a loud thud and a man scream in pain. I should mention that the bedroom window that was smashed was right over the back porch roof. It's a covered wraparound porch, so whoever broke in had somehow climbed up on top of it. I didn't even look out the window to see what happened. I called Igraine to me and we ran downstairs and locked ourselves in the laundry room. The walls are solid concrete and there are no windows in it, so I felt safer there. The cops were there in 10 minutes, and I stayed on with the dispatcher the whole time. I only left the laundry room once they showed up. I gave my statement in a towel, and a couple of the other officers searched the surrounding neighborhood but didn't find anything. They even said they'd look into the local hospitals to see if anyone came in with a broken leg or whatever since the guy had fallen. They figured he climbed up the decorative pillars that are on the wraparound roof. Egrain must have scared him and he slipped or jumped to get off in a hurry. They never did find him. My husband came back later the next day and has since installed lights and cameras around the house. Thank God for Egrain, though. That man seemed intent on getting into the house even though he had most likely heard her barking downstairs. I don't want to imagine what he was going to do if he had gotten in. Egrain is not only a good dog, as far as I'm concerned, she's the best dog. Yes, she got extra treats and slept in my bed that night. This happened 5 days after my 16th birthday. I'm 32 now. Even though this was a long time ago, I'll never forget it. My friend and I were walking home from the store. My mom worked a swing shift, so she wasn't around in the evening. I also hadn't gotten my license yet. Even if I had it, we couldn't afford a second car anyways. It was winter, and even though it was only 6 at night, the sky was dark already. It was also very cold out. I remember wearing my jacket, gloves, a hat, even thermal underwear, and I was still cold. Anyways, we were walking the 6 blocks back to my place when a car stops and rolled down its window. I never got a good look at the guy in the car because he didn't turn on any lights, and the streetlights on that road were all burnt out. I remember he had a soft-spoken, almost effeminate voice. He asked us for directions somewhere else in town. The place was on the other side of town. I don't know what he was doing where he was because he was incredibly far off from where he wanted to go. We told him how to get there, and then he started asking where we lived, how long we had lived there, and other personal things. It started to make me nervous, so we told him we had to go. He asked if we wanted to ride back to our place. Fortunately, we hadn't told him exactly where I lived, just that it was nearby. We told him no. The guy kept insisting, but we walked away. The car sat there watching us walk halfway down the street. There was a shortcut through an alley we were going to take, so the guy wouldn't see which roads we were taking, but before we could get to it, we heard the engine rev behind us. It was a whirlwind of headlights, concrete, and screaming, but my friend and I jumped out of the way before the guy in the car could run us over. We were up and running for the alley before the guy even got out of his car. We heard him yelling at us to come back, that he was sorry and he wanted to talk. We never looked back and hoofed it to my house. Both my friend and I had scrapes and cuts on our hands from the ice and concrete. I had a bump on my head where I must have hit the sidewalk. I didn't feel any pain until we were back home, though. It was the weirdest and scariest thing to ever happen to me. We never called the police because we were young and dumb. Didn't even tell my mom when she got home because I didn't want her to worry about me going out again. I have no clue what that guy was about or what he wanted. I can only assume the worst since he tried to kill us, or at least tried to injure us so he could grab us or something. My wife, kids, and I live 30 miles or so outside of town on 100 acres. The house sits a half-mile off the main road. My wife wanted the works for security when we got the place, so I did a gate, driveway doorbell past the gate, cameras at the gate and at the house, alarm system, 2 new puppies, you name it. I've always lived way out my whole life, so I'm used to the hog squeals, coyote screams, deer huffing, all that jazz. One night around 2 a.m., I heard a loud shatter, and instantly it was covered by the alarm siren for the house. The main keypad is in our bedroom, and I looked to see the glass break sensor in our son's bedroom had tripped. I was thinking the worst, grabbed a shotgun kept for rattlesnakes, and ran to his bedroom hollering for the wife to grab our youngest from his crib just in case. I heard my oldest son screaming. I was shaking so violently I could barely turn the doorknob. My adrenaline flight response had completely taken over. I throw the door open, let out a war cry trying to intimidate a would-be intruder, and my son is clinging to the crib rails and glasses all over the floor. I can just feel the cold winter air snapping through the room. I shut his bedroom door behind me, grabbed him up, and frantically checked the bathroom, his closet, anywhere in the area I thought the intruder would be. I yell for my wife again. Living this far out, we have a system if someone is ever in the house, and one of us knows, but we don't want to alert the intruder. She gives a response indicating she's alone still and okay. I took my son to my wife and hand her the shotgun, telling her I'd grab the rifle and check around outside. I grab a flashlight and my rifle. I scan the entire house. I walk outside and hit the auto lock on the deadbolt. I quickly made my way around to the backside of the house to the busted window. My adrenaline has started to come down a bit, and I'm logically telling myself it had to be a deer, right? Saw his reflection buck the window broke. That's gotta be it. I checked high and low all around the house and never found any indication of what it was. I checked the cameras and couldn't find anything around the house at that time either. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. It took a few weeks for me to let my son sleep in his own bedroom again. I'm positive it was just a deer attacking his reflection, but I've always wondered if someone broke the window and heard the siren and immediately ran. Now, there was a blind spot watching that particular window. I've installed more cameras since the incident, and I have ones that point down each side of the house just to watch the windows and entrances. Motion sensing floodlights on all four corners, and my favorite, one of our pups sleeps right beside his bed every night. I was 18 at the time when this happened, had just moved out of my house and got a place with some roommates. One of them was a friend. The other was a friend of the friend that I didn't really know. We rented a house on the bad side of town because it was all we could afford. The town I lived in back then was only about 100,000 people. Not huge, but not small either. Still, it was pretty safe, so the bad side of town wasn't that bad. But there was a drug problem in the town, and we lived on the outskirts of where all the tweakers were. A few months go by and all was fine. We made sure the doors were locked every night and hadn't had a problem. Now I know my friend had a job, and I had a job as well. But the other guy never seemed to leave for work. Of course, I talked to him a lot and had gotten to know him pretty well, but he was always in the house in regular clothes. Woke up late and didn't seem to be doing too much. He had rent every month, so I didn't press him about anything. It was 5 months in, and I'd gotten back late from my fast food job I had back then. I was on the back porch having a cigarette when a really skinny guy in a tore-up hoodie came in through the back gate. He walked right up to the house like he didn't even notice I was there. I was kind of stunned actually and didn't say anything until he was almost to the house. I asked him what he was doing and he kind of snapped back to reality. He asked if my friend's friend was in. We'll call him John for now. So he asked if John was in. I hollered for John to come out. When John saw him, he looked pissed. He took him to the back gate, and even though I couldn't make out what was being said, it looked like John was berating him. The skinny guy stood there with his head down, and John was laying into him pretty hard. The skinny guy left, and I asked John what that was about, and he just said nothing, then went inside. A few minutes later, I heard John take off in his car. Fast forward to a week after that, and I was in my room. My room was right next to John's, by the way, and I heard a tap on my window. I opened my blinds to see a girl this time, really skinny, and she had red marks all over her face. She saw me and ran out of the yard. Now, I'm not dumb, maybe a little naive, but not dumb. I put 2 and 2 together and figured John was somehow involved in meth. I wasn't straight edge back then either, and I liked to party a bit, but to have that stuff around the house was too much for me. I went and talked to John, and he was actually pretty cool about it. Although looking back, I think he was more brushing me off when he said he'd take care of it. Now that all the backstory is out of the way, I'll tell you the part that was scary. I was on the back porch again one night having a cigarette. This time, a couple of guys came in the backyard and right up to the house. I hadn't seen John in a couple of days, and I told them that, figuring they were there to get drugs or whatever. It was true, though, that John had been gone for about 2 days at that point, which wasn't unusual as he sometimes did that and crashed at his girlfriend's place. These two guys weren't skinny, though. In fact, they were pretty big. Me telling them John wasn't there didn't stop them either. They pushed me out of the way and went into the house. I'm not a tough guy by any means and wasn't about to mess with them. They went in and asked which room was John's, so I told them. They went straight for his room and started to toss the place. They tore apart his dresser, ripped open his bed, and searched his closet. I guess they found what they were looking for because they soon were on their way out again. One of them stopped on the way out and turned to me. He told me to tell John to pay on time next time, or it'll be more than just a visit. Then he punched a wall in the drywall by my head. My friend later said he had his headphones on listening to music and hadn't heard anything. I think he was more scared and hid in his room because there was no way you could not hear them tearing John's room apart. Anyways, that was 10 months into our lease, and 2 months later I was back with my parents for a while. Ended up going back to college the year after, and I think that was a smart decision. I wasn't going to be living with those two anymore, that's for sure.